Hi there, my name is Kiran Chetri, TV journalist as well as literacy advocate. And I'm here at Sarter TV today where we're continuing our series about learning from authors. And it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who is not only a colleague but a great friend, Jeremy Goldman. He is the CEO of Firebrand Group. It is a social media marketing firm and so much more. He is also the author of a very, very interesting read, a book called Getting to Like. And today we're going to talk to him a little bit about the marketing of learning, why it is so vital, and also some tips that he has for people who still have absolutely no idea what to do with their social media platforms. Welcome to the show today, Jeremy Goldman from Firebrand Group, CEO, also the author of a book, Getting to Like, which is super interesting. It's basically about how to boost your personal and professional brand. And I love this part, how to be everybody's first contact, because that's what everybody really does want to be. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
When you were writing Getting to Like, it was obvious that you're trying to basically give companies a how to utilize social media. Anyone you talk to probably has some form of a social media platform. The challenge is, are they using it the right way? So what was the purpose of this book and who was really the target audience?
So when I was writing Getting to Like, I think that this was a major problem that I had noticed out there, is that a lot of people were diving into social media because they had to be in social media, because you had a boss put something down on your desk and say, my competitor is on Snapchat, what are you going to do to get me on Snapchat? And everybody rushes to do something without necessarily thinking, why are they doing it in the first place? You know, it's very important to be thinking about how you're going to tie your social media execution to your overall brand mission.
It's interesting that you say that, because there's an adage that says, you know, there's no such thing as bad publicity, but in terms of the marketing world, when it comes to companies and how they handle their social media, there is such thing as bad tweeting or bad texting or bad share or like on Facebook, right? I mean, we've seen it in some cases with some very high profile people.
Oh, absolutely. I think that one thing that we've definitely seen is that with respect to publicity, people will often have a feeling of FOMO, and they say, well, there's a social media conversation that's happening and we want to be involved in it. And you can't ultimately just say that you're going to be involved in every conversation and you're going to rush out there and say something without necessarily thinking of what you're going to say.
Most companies have in some way obviously listened to the advice of their chief marketing officer, CMO, or others, outside companies like yours who have advised them about their marketing and about the tweaks that they have to make to sort of be with it. Then you're probably going to get this guy who goes, you know, I like doing things the old-fashioned way. I like meeting people one-on-one. I don't need to have a website. I don't need to post. I don't need to tweet. How do you sort of handle that, like Luddite, I guess you could put it, who just is really just completely closed off to even listening to how social media could make an impact for them?
So, great question. There's a lot of people out there who want to respond to a Luddite in a certain way, kind of a knee-jerk way, and say, well, you know what, would you be interested in moving into this cave that I know of? It's got a prime location and you can light fires outside, and you can kind of like mock that approach, but also the approach that I like to take is to try to educate people and to say, well, listen, that way did actually work really well. And the problem is that society has moved on and shifted, and we're in a different age now. So you can absolutely do the things that you used to do in the past, but you're not going to get the results that you got in the past. So doesn't it make sense to evolve, and rather or not, you can easily debate, is it better or is it worse, the times that we're living in now? But I think it's just important to acknowledge that the times are different. They have changed, to quote my friend Bobby D.
What was it?
The times they are a-changin'. What? Bob Dylan? You know this.
I know. I have the Yogi Berra one. The future ain't what it used to be. But obviously you guys have a framework or sort of a methodology to it. Sometimes showing them something super easy. How do I put up and it may to you and me seem like the most easy thing in the world. How do I even, put put up a picture on LinkedIn? How do I add a new job? How do I know who to friend or like or connect with or not. And when you show them how easy one thing is, do you find that that sort of helps open them up to, well, maybe this guy's not as crazy as I think. Maybe there are opportunities here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that when we educate, let's say professionals in the C-suite of large multinational corporations, they don't have time to necessarily pay attention to the fact that LinkedIn has changed the average profile photo size, let's say, or the fact that Twitter retweets work differently than they did a few weeks ago, or the fact that Facebook Live has instituted new rules. So the important thing I would say is to really understand the core components of engagement and what those are, and not worry about these underlying logistics. You know, if you do something wrong and you iterate off of it and you allocate a little bit of time every day towards your social media efforts, then you're going to find that you're going to make major inroads in a short time period.
I find that some of the smartest CEOs actually, and I know that Starter TV is fascinated and intrigued by what the everyday person can learn from some of the most successful CEOs, the Fortune 500s. Some of them say, you don't have to micromanage everything. I don't sit over my accountant's shoulder and say, how are you getting to that? Or how are you doing that? So how do you convince a company to say, hand this over to me? You can trust us, hand it over to me, and believe me, we will be able to show you that we're making an impact, that we're helping you connect with your consumer base or whoever your intended audience is in a better way than you could do it without us.
Well, I think what we try to do at Firebrand Group, and what I think a lot of other firms do well, is they say, rather than hand over, and sometimes it's just a matter of the terminology, we can say, well, what we want to do is partner with you. You have amazing ideas as a thought leader, but you don't have the ability to necessarily articulate those over social media in the way that you want. And our job is to partner with you and help make that happen.
So you basically you say, you have the creativity, you know exactly what message you want to get out. You just don't have the pigeon to carry it where you need it to go. You know what I mean? So you're basically helping them best reach the people they intend to reach. That's the other thing that's interesting. I used to work in television. They used to require us to tweet out or to write a blog, and there would be a certain, almost like this is the minimum that you can do. And without ever really knowing, is this reaching somebody? Is this really reaching the intended people? Is this having the intended effect? And one of the things that I know Firebrand does, and some of the other firms are starting to do this, is you're able to actually show analytically, you can quantify this return on investment, or ROI as we call it, by utilizing certain strategies. How do you show that to a client to explain to them that there is actually tangible growth by embracing new forms of getting their message out?
How long do you have? 5 hours? Because I can take you through. No, in all seriousness, it actually takes a while to not only convince people, but depending on what they're trying to measure. Sometimes it's very easy to measure something and to calculate a return on investment. Sometimes it's incredibly difficult based off of actually what you're trying to do. And I was sitting with a client actually earlier today, and they had something that was very difficult to measure. And as a result, for years, they were not even trying. And you can actually develop proxy measures, and you can develop a number of different calculations.
So in layperson's terms, you guys actually have, you have technology that allows you to, you guys I know call it the deep dive, which I love. But basically what it is you're able to parse out who you're reaching and when and where and what they're most interested in. And
Yep.
that actually is a universal need, in my opinion. I mean, you need it in television. You need to know what your viewers care about, what they're watching for, what information they need. If you're a business, if you're a medical company, anybody who is giving a service to a person needs to know, is this coming through? Or, or is it piled up in the back of the post office and, no one ever reads it? That's the biggest challenge, I feel.
I think you're entirely right about that often it comes down to calculation. It comes down to actually trying to figure out as best as possible, whether or not what you're doing is working. And a lot of people, just because it's a difficult thing to make these calculations. A lot of people just operate off of hunches. And you know what? I think a hunch is essentially a hypothesis that needs to be tested. So one of the things that I always try to advise companies on is you have to have a very data-centric approach. You have to have a non-dogmatic approach if you're trying to get these very big questions answered properly.
A lot of what we've been talking about dovetails perfectly into what Starter TV is trying to do with this CLO Insight Summit, meaning CLO, Chief Learning Officer. There's a lot of companies that are now actually hiring and making a very prominent role for somebody who is helping both internally and externally people learn. And that's something that you're doing as well at Firebrand Group, which is why you're going to be one of the featured speakers at this summit. One of the reasons why I know they wanted to talk to you is because a lot of the CLOs, so you have the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, the CLO, the Chief Learning Officer, has often reported back to the CEO, we have all these tools in place. We have these distance learning programs, we have things right at the laptop, but how to get the employee passionate about learning and about wanting to come to it really may fall in the hands of marketing it correctly. So that's where the Chief Marketing Officer would basically come into play. So what do you think is the biggest challenge of trying to market learning as a marketer?
I think, Kieran, great question. Marketing learning as an idea is one of those things where sadly, as some kids are growing up, it's not cool to learn, right? And especially as you become a successful CEO or successful executive, you have to realize that learning is something that always continues and always should continue. That's frankly, I think, one of the problems where people sometimes look at learning as an admission that you don't know everything.
Right.
But frankly, I want to hire people for Firebrand who have a commitment to always learning. Marketing within an organization can be tremendously beneficial to get people to be involved in internal learning programs. And that's frankly how you raise the overall EQ and IQ, essentially, of your internal staff.
Okay, so emotional intelligence, I'm a huge proponent. I find it almost as important as having an IQ. Being able to understand how to connect with people is, I believe, one of the most vital things because we are all human beings, and we all, as Maya Angelou said, at the end of your life, no one's going to remember what you said, what you did. They're going to remember how you made me feel. And so part of it, I guess, is in some ways humanizing learning, not making a person feel like you're not performing at this level, so we want you to do this, but more of, why don't you come join our community? What we're doing is something that we think is very interesting. We want the best and brightest, and so we want to facilitate an environment where you guys get a leg up on our competition by learning something new, learning a new skill, or finding a new way to innovate what it is we do.
Absolutely. And in some ways, one thing that I think that's very important is that the companies that win today are the companies that learn, because they're often the ones they're okay with creative cannibalization. They're okay with finding ways to do something better. They're not essentially resting on their laurels, right? So when you look at a company like Netflix, right, where they're constantly reinventing, or a Facebook or a Google, they're looking for opportunities to essentially cannibalize themselves in the names of constantly improving. And that's what learning should always be about.
One of the things that you're super passionate about is helping companies look for markers about what is happening in the future. What could they possibly be missing? Things could be going perfectly today, and the next thing you know, someone does it better than you, faster than you, cheaper than you, and you write a series of papers that you provide for your clients called Future Proof, which is basically essentially the same concept of fireproofing your house. You're preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. Why do you find that so vital when it comes to marketing?
Okay, great question, and I don't want to come across as a little immature, but this is my passion. I'm excited enough about this that I might have like a Tom Cruise jumping up and down on the couch moment. Let me just calm down. Okay, essentially, future-proofing is all about looking at all the different variables, as many as possible, right? Because there's always the element of luck or bad luck that comes into play. And I'm a really strong believer, a really big believer in looking in a very non-dogmatic way, looking at the data, and then breaking down a particular problem that we're trying to answer for a client. We try to hone in on it very, very specifically. So for instance, Snapchat, let's take a look. What will its market share be by Q4 2018? That's a very specific question and we can answer. If somebody asks us, Snapchat, what do you think? That's very vague, right? So it's very important.
So you're trying to even figure out what is it we're even trying to ask about the trend.
Because how else will you test to see how well you do? And by the way, that's another key thing. I'm glad you brought that up. With respect to advising people about what's to come, you're going to get a number of things imperfect, not 100% correct. The key thing then is to do a postmortem and to understand where your weaknesses are as an organization. So to see essentially what did we miss, and why. And a perfect example, and Nate Silver says this pretty well, where if somebody says there's a 99% chance that it's not going to rain in the next week, and whenever they say that, it rains in the next week half the time, well then, it probably wasn't 99%, right? You can't blame them for it raining some of the time, but the probabilities you've got to be working on in that situation. So that's really what we try to do, and I think that future-proofing, the more time you spend on it as an organization, the better chance you're going to be able to be proactive rather than putting out fires as they arise.
There are certain things that people call intangibles. You either have it or you don't. Can you teach the desire to learn?
I think you can teach the desire to learn to some extent, and I think studies, in fact, have shown this, where people's aptitude for learning goes up the more they're exposed to learning, the more they've been essentially put in that type of environment. And that's what I love that you're a literacy and learning advocate, because the more you encourage learning, the exponential the return is going to be. And in general, frankly, when I'm going around educating and speaking to audiences, is to embrace learning and to figure out how you can essentially become a better learner within an organization, how you can actually, at all levels of your organization, foster innovation through learning. I think that to me it's something that I frankly feel very passionate about, and I think that if you look at the companies that are getting ahead today, that's how they're getting ahead. And if you want to foster that within your organization, that's the same thing that you have to embrace as a C-suite executive. I think the Chief Learning Officer, by the way, is something that a lot of organizations haven't yet embraced, but I'm applauding the fact that there are so many organizations that are taking the leap forward and realizing that this is a key seat at the table, essentially. You have to empower somebody to be the CLO, even if you don't officially have somebody in that title.
Right, because there are other titles. What are some of the other titles people use, like Chief
for instance,
Human Resources?
Yes, exactly. And I've seen even Chief Strategy Officers that also have a CLO as part of their title. The key thing is to embrace the mindset. And yeah, the title is absolutely important if you want to send a message to everybody within the organization that learning is critical to your success. And there are a lot of people who I think are learning, but they're not even aware that they are. They're almost closed off to the idea of constantly evolving, and it's infuriating because I just see potential left and right that people don't necessarily embrace, and that's almost what my mission is. If I have anything, it's to constantly be optimistic and to tell people, actually, yeah, you can evolve, and here's how you can actually do it.
One of the things that I've always found fascinating, because you know my background, I'm from Nepal. There are vast areas of Nepal where there really is not a lot of access to education, and education is prized. So while our kids are like, great, I want to play more, games, I want to, FaceTime my friends, or I want to, play Clash of Clans. In Nepal, to learn, and in so many countries where there's like almost like a thirst for knowledge, being in school, having a book bag and a pencil is like a source of pride. And it almost brings tears to my eyes to talk about it, because they want it so bad, they want to learn. And the reason I'm such an advocate of this is because if you teach them the one building block, which is how to read, then the future is endless for them. I feel like you cannot necessarily, everybody is not going to be Einstein, or, everybody is not going to be one of our founding fathers, or,
and that's
the
okay,
inventor.
by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
But anybody who gets the basic right and the ability to learn how to read, they can teach themselves almost anything, and the future is, is limitless.
I think the future is limitless for anybody who can be exposed to learning and education in that way. And one thing that I always like to say is that the next Mark Zuckerberg will not look like Mark Zuckerberg. They will come from somewhere else. The main thing I feel is that the more we can essentially broaden the pool of educated individuals, not just across the US, but across the world, the greater the opportunity it is to create more wealth for society. Because it's almost as a selfish standpoint, we should all want learning and educational access to as many people as possible, so that if the next Mark Zuckerberg comes from Nepal, or Iran, or France, or
Right.
Ghana, we all benefit.
A lot of people sort of identify themselves, and they're identified or recognized by other people by their greatest achievement. Something always has to come before a person's name, such as Pulitzer Prize winning, such and such novelist, or, Academy Award winning so-and-so, so-and-so. It's almost like you're being validated by your best moment in life, when you probably had a lot of mediocre or even horrible moments that led up to that. So what I wanted to ask you first is, if you feel comfortable about telling this to everybody, what do you view as your biggest failure or setback in life?
I don't know if it was my biggest failure, but it's the first one that comes to mind. And I practically majored in failing, across my life. And frankly, thank God that I live in this day and age where failure is embraced, because I've just gotten to be very good at it. I would say that probably having a few people that I worked with, who I was very close with, leave me, in part because I wasn't almost selfish enough or a big enough advocate for them. It was actually a situation where I frankly felt that I might have put clients first, or not necessarily just been thinking about the needs of my team. And that was an utter and complete failure. If I look at that and I say that I've grown as a result, and I do a lot better of a job in that area, then I can hold my head up high, because then that failure was for a reason. But if not, it would have been in vain.
Because you learned from it.
Exactly, because you learn from it.
What would you consider today, and don't take away your whole humbleness, because I know you're humble, what do you view as your greatest success?
I would say probably one of my biggest successes was being able to identify a little company in 2003 called Mobileye, where I developed the whole branding system for them that they went to market with. They had a successful IPO. Intel bought a little stake of it, and then they purchased the whole thing for $15 billion. I, in all honesty, learning and growing from each experience, and if you can grow from a success like that, then those can be valuable too. But it's all about learning, and it's all about what actually was successful about any particular project that I'm
Right.
involved in.
You just got a table at Rayo's, or if you're not from New York, it's this impossible place to get seated at. It has Italian food. Everyone loves to go there, and people actually own shares of tables. Interesting business model, by the way. You have your table at Rayo's, and you can invite 3 people, living or dead, that you have always wanted to talk to, pick their brain. Fascinating. This isn't like Victoria's Secret models and your favorite basketball players, although they could still be. But these are people who you want to have a really deep conversation with about either how they made it, what they did, or how to better ourselves in the future. Who would you pick?
I think, and this might be a little bit of like an eclectic group, but I would say probably Richard Branson, Danny Kahneman, who is an author, educator, economist, theorist, really sharp guy, and then I think probably Carly Kloss, actually, and not even because of looks or anything like that, but because Carly Kloss obviously is a author, entrepreneur, supermodel, I guess you could say, but she's inspirational in that she's embraced a personal brand and figured out, well, how do I get from point A to point B to point C, which is really where the future of work is going to be. People constantly evolving and having a number of different careers. Richard Branson, obviously, for all of his entrepreneurial spirit and how he's found a way to take all these different disparate threads and tie them all together. And then I wanted to have somebody that I could learn from who could almost be the straight man in the conversation. And I think Danny Kahneman is probably one of the smartest people alive. So I picked only people alive. If I'll do, people only dead next time.
No, but that's a typical CEO. You actually didn't even just think about the individuals, but you thought about how they would meld as a team. So that's important. That was what you learned from your failure, right? As circling back.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure getting a chance to speak to you. I say you're a genius, and you also have that spirit in you that you always want to learn and you also want to teach, and I really admire it. So nice talking to you.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much.
Thanks. On behalf of Starter TV, we all are passionate about learning, and that's why you're watching this, and that's why I'm here, and that's why Russell created this entire brand. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kiran Chetri. See you next time.